Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, July 27th, 2023. This broadcast is something that I could do in my sleep. It's near and dear to my heart. Several years ago, we decided at Evoke that in addition to our wilderness therapy program, and even after our intensive program began, that we were going to launch a coaching program. So tonight I'm going to talk about coaching. I'm going to talk about what it is, what it's not, what's the same or similar to therapy, and what's different. But I'm also going to talk about therapy and coaching and parenting in the same context because there are many parallels that we can draw from them. And what we were thinking when we started the coaching program was there are so many folks that we deal with, both at our wilderness therapy program. This has been going on for well over 20 years, but also at our intensive program who say it's really difficult to find a therapist. And that's become more and more true since the pandemic because so many more people are accessing therapy. If you're looking for a career or if you know a young person who's looking for a career that's inclined toward these gifts, therapy is a wonderful opportunity because there's so much need, as we know. The stigma for therapy and coaching is going down somewhat. People are becoming more conscious and aware of mental health and mental illness and symptoms. And so we're really seeing this influx. It's been our fastest growing program over the past couple of years. So we're really excited about it. I'm going to talk about some logistics before I get into the theoretical aspects of things because something that differentiates our coaching program from other coaching offerings is like therapy, we only charge for the session that you're having. So you can take one session, you can take three sessions, you can think that you're going to take 6 months worth of coaching sessions, and you can stop after one. If it's not a good fit, you can move on. If it doesn't strike you to have them early, you can do as many or as little as they like. And so many of the coaching programs, in fact, I understand why it's beneficial to them, but I don't quite understand why it's beneficial to the client unless there's a huge discount associated with it, that people are offering packages, 90-day packages, 20 sessions. We don't offer those at Evoke. Coaching is just for the session that you have. So with that, let me get into the philosophical idea. What's the difference between coaching and therapy? I have asked this question and been asked this question so many times that I can't count. Let me distinguish a few things first of all. Therapy is done by a therapist in the state that they are licensed. That's a requirement to practice psychotherapy. You have to be licensed within your state or working under somebody's license if you're still accruing hours for them. So that's therapy. You can think of therapy as a more acute process. Our coaching program doesn't deal with people that are severe risk or that are in need of psychiatric services. That's not something that we provide. So therapy is like in the treatment world is something we would call primary care or acute care. Coaching has a broad application, and so many of the themes, topics, issues that you can do in therapy, you can do in coaching. And many of our coaches are trained psychotherapists, so you're going to get that knowledge base. What happens with the Evoke coaching uh, opportunities is that all of our coaches are expected and required to attend trainings and to be acquainted with the attachment based model that we talk about at Evoke. So, when you're leaving wilderness therapy, if that's your case, when you're leaving an intensive, let alone if you're somebody that just hears about the coaching program through the podcast or through social media and just wants to sign up. But for those of you who are looking for that same kind of theme, that same knowledge base, an Evoke coach can do that. We also have many coaches, as I'll show you in just a moment, so many coaches who have worked in residential treatment, who have worked in therapeutic settings that you might be familiar with. So it's not just something theoretically that they're aware of, but it's something where they have a vast amount of experience. We have well over 40 coaches on our staff. And I'm going to read, I have this slide at the end of every broadcast, but I'm going to go ahead and read the bullet points about the things that you can use coaching for, the things that it's appropriate for. Clarifying boundaries and communication skills building. That's probably the most general idea in coaching is that we're going to teach you about boundaries, which are just boundaries are like the outline of a self. And coaches through their process can help you identify that, to help you find out what you need, what you want, what will work for you. Parenting and family dynamic issues, obviously, because our coaches are trained in the attachment based model, which has borrowings, if you will, which has borrowed ideas from the family systems model. You're going to get somebody who's equipped to talk about and deal with family and systems issue, couples issues, co-parenting issues. Wraparound support for families and children and adults in treatment. This is the most obvious application for coaching. Like I mentioned earlier, if you've been through a treatment process, hiring a coach who's familiar with the process you've already been engaged with for at least a couple of months, if not longer, can help you make that transition. Reintegration from treatment settings back to the home environment, that refers specifically to the young people. Again, so a lot of people are doing this casually anyway, but so many therapists, because of the setting, build such a strong connection and build a foundation of knowledge with the clients. When I've considered in my life switching therapists, one of the things that I've felt that so many people feel is I don't want to have to start over again. I don't want to have to start to educating and give my therapist the background of my stories. I want to stay with somebody who already knows that. So the coach can take that knowledge base both theoretically, but if they've worked with your child, they can also have a seamless experience where they're working with them at home. So some of our coaches do work in the wilderness. Not all of our wilderness therapists are available in the coaching offering, but so many of them have either been there and might even be with your child. Couples and intimacy issues. Um, Again, we're starting to break away from our more traditional program of wilderness therapy and say our coaches are adept in private practice, in private coaching and therapy settings, and can work with couples and intimacy issues. Codependency for sure. Codependency, I've said this so many times, but I want to articulate it as clearly and simply as I can. Codependency is a pop psychology term that is essentially an attachment wound, an attachment fracture, a lack of attachment. So when we talk about codependency, we're talking about relationship issues. We're talking about individuation, intimacy, differentiation. We're talking about those kinds of ideas. In other words, most simply put, what does it mean to be an individual, and what does it mean to be to love and be connected to another person? That's kind of the healthy side, the recovery side of codependency. Post-intensive support and integration, like I said, sometimes, and this is really important, where you don't get this necessarily at other intensive programs. If you attend an intensives, so many of our intensives facilitators also offer coaching, are also part of our coaching staff. So not only do they have the theoretical background, but they're going to have a front row seat to the work that you did during your intensive. So you know them. You can also get a flavor for them during the intensive process. So when I talk about therapy, the therapeutic intensives are a springboard into your work, a starting point. You can do all at once. You can start with an intensive program, and if there's some availability, which there often is, most often is, more often than not is, with the therapist or the coach who's running the intensive, then you can sign up for that afterwards. Uh, Navigating challenges related to the stage of life. That's just about midlife. What do you want to do when you grow up? Are you transitioning from being a child in your family's home to being a young adult? Are you transitioning to being a young adult where you're still partially and largely supported by your parents to becoming an individuated adult? Are you working with children that are going through the maturational process? Are you going through empty nest? Are you looking for careers? Are you experiencing the death and loss of your parents? So many of our parents that we work with are at that age where they're dealing with challenges with their children, but they're also dealing with aging parents. Increasing self-awareness and insight, obviously, you know, this is in kind of a contrast with the first bullet point. There are two main avenues. There are many, but there are two main avenues in coaching and therapy, and one is skill building, tool building, and the other one is insight and awareness. I like to think of it as working from the outside in versus working from the inside out. And so coaches, should be adept. Therapists should be adept at adjusting their model. We listed on here psychedelic therapy integration. We do not provide psychedelic assisted therapy. We do not provide psychedelic experiences for our clients, but more and more and more people are attending plant-based ceremonies like ayahuasca in and out of the United States. They're using psilocybin, LSD. Psilocybin is the technical term for mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. They're also using MDMA, which is the active ingredient in ecstasy. The research is showing that all of these things are having dramatic effect on trauma and PTSD. Ketamine is becoming more and more popular. These things are becoming supported by the FDA in the context of therapy, supported by the federal government in the context of therapy. We're seeing an expansion of that. But here's my soapbox about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. The therapy is only as good as your integration. It is just a tool. It opens the door. It lowers the defense. It provides new opportunities for new neural pathways. But just because you have this wonderful freeing experience under psychedelics doesn't mean that you have the tools, the awareness to proceed forward. So therapy or coaching matched with a psychedelic experience is, in my opinion, essential for it to be most effective. And I actually think that a lack of integration, a lack of a somewhat robust integration can be harmful or dangerous. Crisis in faith or spirituality. I don't know what the numbers are. We've never really studied this, but my experience is at least one or two participants in a seven-person intensive, seven-person group will report significant trauma or stress related to their faith issues, to related either to their history or their faith crisis or questioning that's going on for them right now. So that's something that we're very common with. Dealing with guilt and shame. I'm gonna underline this next point to emphasize it, and I don't believe that I can overemphasize what I'm about to say. But the number one barrier, in my experience, the number one barrier or barriers, maybe more specifically, the number one thing that gets in the way of people getting healthier is guilt and shame. So what that means is that you have to have somebody that can give you a reality check, that can give you a perspective from outside of your system, from outside of your context. Somebody that can give you therapeutic permission, it's often called, to embrace taking care of yourself, saying no to somebody, setting limits and boundaries with loved one, with family members, with acquaintances. Guilt and shame is, remember, like I talk about all the time, it will feel bad to get healthier. That's as simply as I can put it. You will feel bad. You will feel scared. Typically, we're talking about afraid of the outcome. Like, how is everything going to settle out if I make this courageous stance in my life? If I take this stance, or if I make this courageous step to tell somebody how I feel, what I think, who I am. We're afraid of the outcome. Are we going to be left without a partner? Are we going to have our children reject us? Those kinds of fears. So fear of outcomes, but right next to that is the guilt. Somebody said to me not too long ago, and I've heard this many, many times, it sounds like what you're preaching is selfishness. And I said, that's what it sounds like. That's what we've been conditioned to think, that the kinds of things we talk about in this process, in this therapeutic process, are. We think of them as selfish. That is why not everybody does it. The coolest thing about therapy and a coaching experience, the coolest thing I love is that there's a full circle. In the beginning, we deny ourselves. We don't know how to take care of ourselves. We don't know how to set limits with other people. We don't know how to say no, or I'm not willing to. We get empowered and we get brave. We build up courage over time to say no and to set boundaries. And sometimes the pendulum can swing a little far. I think I shared it the other night that my therapist said to me around 2011, 12, When I was going through my midlife crisis, she said, I think you're just trying to figure out what you like, what works for you. So in those initial phases of setting boundaries and practicing self care, it can swing a little bit far. It's going to be messy because you have no template. The guardrails have been removed. The shoulds and the shouldn'ts have been kept at bay. They've been defeated. They've been put farther away from you, at arm's length at least. And when that happens, it's going to be messy. That's why it's so important to have patience and practice non-judgment with people that are going through finding themselves late in life. So guilt and shame, therapy, like my daughter says, therapy is a place that you go to as you're breaking free of your family patterns and your family dysfunction, that you go to so that somebody else can help you feel the inevitable guilt that you will feel. So guilt and shame. Recovery support and addiction issues. Somebody can help to, like a sponsor, somewhere between a sponsor and a therapist. They can help you with your addiction and recovery. And of course, support with LGBTQ plus issues. Either if you're a parent struggling to make sense out of your child coming out, if you're an individual adult struggling with coming out, if you're experiencing depression or anxiety, if you've experienced a loss of community, which a lot of people experience when they come out, an Evoke coach can help with that. Again, these are for parents, these are for couples who don't have parents or are simply working on intimacy issues. Therefore, of course, families and then individuals. I think the mistake that people think is that an Evoke coach is just an extension of our wilderness therapy program, because that's the thing we've been doing for the last 25 years. But it's much, much more than that. It's all these things. One of my favorite ideas, I just read it, another version of this recently in Dr. Carl Jung's book. He said this. He said, naturally, a doctor must be familiar with the so-called methods, but he must guard against falling into any specific routine approach. In general, one must guard against theoretical assumptions. Today, they may be valid. Tomorrow, it may be the turn of other assumptions. In my analyses, they play no part. I am unsystematic, very much by intention. To my mind, in dealing with individuals, only individual understanding will do. We need a different language for every patient. In one analysis, I can be heard talking in the Adlerian dialect, and in another, the Freudian. That is our model at Evoke. It is a match between you and the therapist, and that's why, or the coach. And that's why I encourage you so strongly to be a consumer, to be a critical consumer, to ask tough questions of the coach or therapist, and to expect intelligent answers. If the coach or the therapist seems bothered or put out by your questions, then you've bumped up against their limitations, their inadequacies, their lack of training and emotional maturity. You can ask them questions about if they go to therapy. When we're in graduate school, by the way, they train you when people ask probing questions like do you go to therapy, that you're not supposed to. They don't say that you're not supposed to answer, but they imply that you don't have to answer, and that they give you little tricks. Like, why does that, to say back to the client, why does that matter to you? What would be the difference? What are you looking for? And spinning it back on the client. But frankly, I had somebody, I've had people ask this, but I had somebody just recently ask me, what do you do if you find out or believe that your therapist doesn't go to therapy? For me, it would be hard to trust somebody who doesn't have personal experience in therapy. And I've worked with successful, and I put that in quotes, successful therapists in the past. Successful because they have a robust practice, they're very articulate, they're making a good living at therapy. I've worked with many who qualify as successful under those descriptions, who have very little to no experience in therapy. And I say to them the exact same thing that I say to parents, which is, you can only really take people as far as you've gone. I was thinking about this just the other day about my writing. Somebody was asking on social media the question about self-esteem. How does one bolster or improve their self-esteem? And I was thinking to myself, when I give my answer, it will sound random. It'll sound arbitrary. It'll sound like one model among very many because you have to have experience with it to recognize it. My answer, by the way, is you sit with somebody, you sit across from somebody for an extended period of time who loves and accepts you, who practices non-judgment and compassion, who seeks to understand you. In other words, somebody who provides you an attachment experience. See, to me, it's quite simple, and I also have experience with it. It's quite simple that the way that we are healed from our attachment wounding, which is our developmental wounding, our childhood, our trauma, it's all of that. That's all under the umbrella of attachment. The way that we are healed from our attachment wounding is the same way that the wounding occurred in the first place, in relationship to somebody else. But because we are consciously, we're blind to the process consciously, we don't see it consciously, we don't recognize where it came from, and it just feels to us like it was always in there. We have thoughts and feelings, ideas about ourselves that we think originated within us. And yes, there's a genetic component to this that predisposes you to certain vulnerabilities or resiliencies, but essentially it's the way that the environment interacts with that hereditary, that genetics. So we heal in the same way that we were wounded. We heal in relationships. This idea that you're to pick yourself up from your bootstraps, that you're simply to practice self-love. People that say to other people, you're never going to get, you're never going to feel, you can't ask for other people to accept you. You have to learn to accept yourself. It's an inside job. Those kinds of things, they don't understand how human beings develop, period. It doesn't make sense. I wrote about this very clearly in both books because it's seminal to attachment theory. People don't understand that the way that your parents and the big people, and then later on the culture and the peers, the teachers and so forth, but the way that the big people felt and thought about you is how you came to feel and think about yourself. That inner voice, it might not be that people said those exact words to you, that voice, that critical voice that you carry around, that doubting voice that you carry around, but the people around you had similar feelings, had similar thoughts, similar critiques. And now it's yours, and now you have to deal with it. Now it's your life. So you have a glimpse of some of our coaches here from many different backgrounds. You can do more research on the website to find out more about it. This is a list of these are the shortcuts to me to deciding whether or not you have a good coach or a good therapist. First of all, how do you feel about your therapist? Can you share with them how you feel? That you feel nervous, that you feel awkward, that you feel judged, that you felt hurt last week or the week before. That's really important that you be able to say that. And it's really important that when you do say it, it's a reparative experience. If you tell your coach or your therapist for that matter that you're hurt or that you're angry or upset at something that they said and they twist it to suggest, imply, or directly say that you misunderstood them, they're missing the point. I tell our coaches, I say, if a client has the courage to confront you and tell you how they feel, to take that risk, you're in the golden moment, the magic moment in the process. So you get to be an equal with the therapist. And in fact, ideally, the therapist is large enough to contain any of that. And a qualified therapist or coach will respond to a client confronting them with saying, "Thank you. I'm so glad you said that. I'm honored that you would tell me that, given your background, given the risk that it most likely was for you to say that to the big people growing up, that it's been to tell your spouse or others in your life how you feel it's with your disagreeable feelings. But because so many therapists don't know that the most important training in therapy is their own healing. I'm not talking about an intellectual process. I'm not talking about how smart they are or even how verbally articulate they are, but their willingness to carry that and not have it become a threat to their ego because they don't know that that's the task. It's really hard for therapists to see it when it happens. All they know is that they feel threatened. All they know is that they feel insecure. But that's the secret. Tell your therapist how you feel. How do they respond when you challenge them? Can they model being human? Can they model apologizing? I learned this from my therapist, and the luck of it was that I had a moment of significant frustration with her after a session with my mother. My mother was here on vacation, and I thought it would be fun. I really did. I thought it would be fun to go to therapy, just like the old days, I told her when I was younger. And she, ignorant as I was, said, yeah, that should be fun. So we went to therapy. I'm now an adult with 3 children at the time and a PhD in therapy. And we go there, and immediately she starts getting defensive. I refer to things that I thought we had talked about. My therapist kicked me out of the room, spent the rest of the hour with her. And when I came back the next week, I said, I'm not frustrated with my mother because I expect that from her. But I said to my therapist, I'm frustrated with you. You did the exact thing. You did the thing that approximated or replicated the wound from my childhood, which is my mother's needs took front and center stage, even in my therapy session. And I expected her to give me an explanation, a justification, to say something like, that's what I was trying to help you in the long run. But she did something different. She did all those things I just shared with you, an adult, mature, wise therapist would do. Thanked me. And I remember thinking that day, this is like 2000, probably 4, I would guess, give or take. I remember thinking, this is different than any adult I've ever come across. And since that session in 2004, I have made it my goal, my regular practice, that when I do feel upset or hurt or anxious or scared or judged, to tell her when I can, as soon as I can. And invariably, she responds the ways that I've suggested. And so what's that told me? What's that told me? Excuse me. What's that taught me? It's given me something to measure my relationships against. So now when I tell my child, excuse me, when I tell my wife that I'm upset, when I tell close friends or people that I work with that I'm upset, people that are on my level, it doesn't work necessarily when you talk down to an employee or somebody you supervise or a child. It doesn't work that way. But when I tell somebody that's on my level or higher how I'm feeling about them, especially if those feelings are disagreeable, I listen and I measure it against my therapist. I also have incorporated that into my own life, into my own practice. It's not easy when a client tells you you're upset because you want to do well. You don't want to hurt your clients. You have this ego in the back of your head that says, I want to be a good therapist. But as you become more and more comfortable with your humanity, with your humanness, and luckily I had a model for it, you're able to say to the folks around you, thanks for telling me. I'm glad you said something. What do you need from me? Do you want me to hear it? Do you want to offer my idea, where I was coming from? Will that feel dismissive to you? It's been a great model, a great pattern to pattern myself after. What seems to be the goal for the therapist? Do they seem anxious to fix you? Do they seem anxious to reduce symptomology? If they're anxious to fix you, if they're anxious for solutions, for to get to the end, then it's going to feel much like for many people it did growing up. You're going to feel this pressure to perform, to get better, to impress them, to make them feel good about what they're doing. So when I say look for a therapist who doesn't need to be a good therapist, that's what I mean. Well, is it their agenda or yours, right? In our experience, a good coach or a good therapist works with your agenda. Now, if your agenda doesn't match with what they're trained or what they believe that they can do to support you, it's their job to say, I can't support that. But aside from those limited experiences, it is what do you want to work on? Now, I can't answer every question. If you tell me, should I get married? Should I get divorced? I can't answer that. But I can tell you the work that goes into answering that for yourself, right? The coach or the therapist is not an expert on your life. That is, they don't know the answers to your questions about your life. But what they are an expert in, what our coaches are experts in, is creating a context, a conversation, a situation, a session where you can discover for yourself the truth, find your truth, as we say. So if it's their agenda, if they're eager and anxious to get back to a certain procedure, a certain model, you know you're dealing with somebody who's afraid enough that they're clinging to that structure. How flexible are they? So many therapists use professional boundaries in quotes, professional boundaries to justify bad customer service, bad communication, poor response. I have seen it often. The younger, less experienced the therapist is, really the less evolved the person is, the more likely they are to do that. Are they able to own their limitations? Just like in parenting, if you're a coach and you're not on occasion once in a while apologizing to your client, you're not I don't understand how you can be doing good work because it's a hard profession and you're gonna make mistakes. I tell the same thing to parents. If you're not apologizing, and I'm not talking about making excuses or justifying somebody's bad behavior or giving somebody a blank check to treat you anyway. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about owning what you've done. If you're not practicing apologies on occasion, I don't know how you're doing your job. I don't know how you're doing your coaching or your therapy job or how you're parenting effectively. I don't know how you're teaching the person that you're working with in whatever context it is what it means to be a human. You're not showing them that it's okay. The biggest shift in my career, and I've learned it from these broadcasts more than anything, I've applied it to the rest of my life. But here's where I learned it is in the early days when I was teaching, people would close these broadcasts and they would write me emails and they would tell me that they felt guilty after listening to me. And I know I didn't want people to feel that, but I was confused by it. And now people say that the letters and the emails that I get today are people saying, thank you for showing me that you make mistakes. Thank you for showing me your humanness. You've taken a great weight of guilt and shame and pressure off of my shoulder by modeling it. So it's really important that the authority figure, and that's really what I'm talking about, that the coach, that the therapist be able to own their limitations. People that give advice, shoulds, and solutions. I mean, this is universal. Again, this isn't limited to an Evoke coach. This is therapists, this is parents, this is spouses. The instinct to give somebody advice is a lack of awareness of boundaries. It is anxiety, right? Free floating anxiety. I am the reason that I don't give advice to people's life questions, to people's big life decisions, even small life decisions at times. The reason I don't, because I believe that the process of psychotherapy or evoke coaching, the process is to discover your authentic self. So how can I give you advice if that's the goal? That is like you coming to me saying, "What's my favorite color? What foods do I like? Where should I go on a trip?" It's not a technique that I use. It's a fundamental belief system that I don't know your truth unless you tell me. But what I do know is I know how to stir it up so that you can discover your truth. I know how to provide a safe context so that you can discover your truth. So that you don't feel the should energy coming from me or from our coaches. And that instinct, that advice, and that should, that solution instinct it is uh, it is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. My wife tells me she has a workout group that she works out with, and when somebody comes in with a problem, even the coach, that the her peers that are in this workout group will give advice and solutions to that person for many sessions on end. I was talking to a client recently where they were talking about working with their daughter. A mother was talking about working with her daughter, and where her daughter was having a bad day, and the mother reached out and just offered love. I'm here for you. I love you. Sending you warm thoughts. This is a young adult daughter. And I said to that woman, I said, people have no idea how much work it took to get to that point. People have no idea what a high level of functioning and relating that is. It's simple, it's subtle. I tell the story about when we brought out some visitors from the New York Times, and we were helping to co-produce a play based on wilderness therapy in 2016 and 17. So a reporter came out and the director came out, and they wanted to have a real experience with it. And they asked if they could participate. And every one of them wanted to give the kids advice. And what I said to them when the group was over is I pulled them aside and I said, "Do you see how the therapist listened? Do you see how the therapist was quiet and asked questions? Do you see how the parents didn't give solutions or answers?" That's therapy. That's different. See, therapy coaching is different qualitatively, ideally. And when you get exposed to something different, when you like the fish who's last to discover water, when you feel for the first time not water, you start to recognize the water you've been swimming in, the soup that you've been cooked in, the air that you've been breathing. The first mistake of a therapist or a coach is to try to make a point. Everybody does that. I do it more often than I'd like to confess to. I have an agenda, an idea, and I impose that on the client. Sometimes it's not even a problem or a mistake, except for the fact that the client isn't ready to hear it or disagrees with it. So it's not even that I'm doing something objectively wrong. So that first mistake is something that every coach and every therapist and every parent and every person makes. But the second mistake is the big mistake. The second mistake is when the therapist or the coach or the parent or the spouse doubles down. When they can't recognize the resistance, and resistance is a defense. And the defense is there to ward off or to protect the individual from threats. So when you're trying to force your idea, your agenda onto somebody else, when I'm doing that, and the person is resisting and saying, "Well, it won't work," or "I'm not sure you quite understand the situation," or "I don't know if I want to do that," whatever it looks like, whatever it sounds like, if I don't recognize that and I get caught in my agenda, in my thinking, I re-explain it, or the person next to me re-explains it if I'm in co-therapy or if I'm in a group setting. So when you feel a therapist doing that, it, I don't want you to take on the responsibility of coaching and teaching and training your therapist to your coach, but I do want to encourage you to summon up the courage to tell them what you're recognizing. And again, if they don't recognize the beauty and the courage, the bravery of that kind of a step, you might want to find a new therapist. Speaking of creating the container, I have a few quotes about this from Fred Rogers, first of all, whom I absolutely adore. I did not adore him when I was a child. He was so weird and different from my family, and he seemed Pollyannish to me. I probably was exposed to, I was parentified, I was adultified as a child. And so it felt like he was talking down to me. But now when I see him, I realize what a genius he was. And I say this, I say this in a way that he's the best example I've ever seen on film, where we have lots of examples of somebody that can create a safe container for somebody else's process. Fred Rogers said, I don't think anyone can grow unless he's loved exactly as he is now, appreciated for what he is rather than what he will be. That is the great paradox of life. Or as Carl Rogers says it, when a person realizes he has been deeply hurt, his eyes moisten. I think in some real sense he is weeping for joy. It is as though he were saying, thank God someone hears me. Someone knows what it's like to be me. Carl Rogers went on to say that the great paradox is that it's only when we accept ourselves that we can change. And how does one accept oneself? By being accepted. We as a species make sense of ourselves in the context of the attachment figure, who in childhood is the parents and the teachers. But in coaching or therapy, it's the coach or the therapist. We make sense of ourselves by the way they treat us, the way they feel towards us, the energy that they have in our interactions. Of course, the words matter. Language is very important, but language is just the evidence of that underlying energy. This is the point that I've been making over on. This is a quote actually from the Journey of the Heroic Parent. The fact is that external validation is necessary. The key is to find a source who values the authentic self rather than some part object. That's the key. That's the secret. We need external validation, but we need something beyond or aside from how pretty we are or handsome we are, how smart or talented or gifted we are, right? Whether you're a fast runner or a good dancer or even an articulate client in therapy, being praised or acknowledged for those things doesn't address the wound. What we need is somebody that can validate us when we show our horrible, rotten self. Like I always say, when somebody says in a coaching session or in a therapy session, when they say, I know I shouldn't think this, but I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I know I should be grateful, but I know as a white male, I should recognize my privilege, but I'm sad, but I'm depressed, but I'm unhappy. When somebody says something like that, I know I'm about to hear something real. And that's what I welcome, right? As a coach or a therapist, that's what I'm welcoming is the moment when that person shows me a part of themselves that they expect because of their history, because of their attachment history. They expect to be treated the same way that they were treated when they were young. Well, you need to be nice. You need to think about gratitude, on and on and on. We are an experiential therapy program. I really can't overstate that. Our wilderness therapy program is often is obviously an experiential approach, and our intensive program using art, group therapy, psychodrama is a large part of our program. We are experiential. We believe in activating the work through movement and through different kinds of experiences. We think that gives access gives us access and you access to parts of the brain that are unconscious. And if your therapeutic process, either as a coach, as a therapist, or a client, if it doesn't take into account, if it doesn't explore unconscious material, it's inadequate. And that's what so many American models are about. So many therapists are trained in these models that have simple models with how you work with people. Not going to name them by name, but so many of them are known by their acronyms, right? The ABC, the DEF, the XYZ model, whatever it is. So many of them are known by that. And therapists, because it's terrifying when you're a new therapist, therapists grab onto those models tightly. They get certifications and letters after their name. But what Jung said, and he was right, he said, learn the theories, master the techniques, but in the end, just be one human soul touching another human soul. And that's what makes the difference. To say to the client, I can't take away your pain, but I can be here with you so you don't have to be alone in it. So we can be told that we are okay, but we must experience actually being okay by having somebody reflect that back, and the way that they look at us, the way that they listen to us, the way that they talk to us, the way that they feel about us. We have to experience actually being okay by having somebody reflect that back to us again and again. And of course, the longer that I'm in therapy, which is a long time now, the more convinced I am that it's a lifelong process. I asked my therapist, who's in her mid 80s, I asked her, because I know she doesn't go to therapy anymore. She's been to many, many years of psychoanalysis and therapy. And I asked her why. And she said, at this point, she said, I don't know who I would go to at this point, which makes a lot of sense to me. She says, if you have any recommendations, I'm open to them. But at this point in my career and my development, I don't know where that I would go. And I don't know what's going to happen when she stops practicing or passes away. Maybe at that point, I'm sure at that point I will take a significant pause. But I don't want to have to train my new therapist. I really don't. I don't want you have to train your therapists or your coaches either. Alice Miller said that the therapist may cloak his disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline, obsessive, regression, destructive, but unless he explores, or she explores the 3-year-old boy or girl inside of himself, he will not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. There are so many therapists, and you can feel their judgment. It feels like I had one time somebody come to me in a consultation case, and I was in consultation with the therapist, but the family reached out to me and they said, I don't think our therapist likes us, and I don't think our therapist likes our child. And when I was talking to the therapist, she said, I don't really like this family. I don't like this kid. And I said to her, I said, I know. I can feel it. They can feel it. They know it. A well-trained therapist is a person who is skilled at creating an environment that is safe and in which one can feel welcome. That is, the therapist is not like one's parents. The therapist listens. He or she doesn't simply dispense answers. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who's flexible. Like Jung said, in one moment with one person, I'm talking in the Adlerian dialect. That's after Alfred Adler. And another one, I might be talking in Freudian or in my case, Jungian terms. I'll use principles from cognitive behavioral therapy. I'll use principles from dialectical behavioral therapy. I'll use principles from rock and roll, from art, from track and field, from gardening, from Einstein, from Picasso, from Mick Jagger, right? I'll use whatever it is because we're doing this thing together and it's a journey that we're on together. So it's flexible in ideas, flexible in approaches, flexible in dialogue. I've told the story that my therapist sees me, my wife, my adult daughter, her fiance, and several other people that I know for that matter. And we've joked about it, the four of us in our family. We've joked about the fact that we really have four different therapists. And that is a really good sign because my therapist says and does things with my daughter that she would never do with me, and vice versa. Look for a therapist who, like I said, is not using boundaries as an excuse for their rigidity. Look for a therapist who's interested and passionate about understanding and finding you versus diagnosing you. Look for a therapist who's patient. Some people will quit therapy because they get sick and tired of hearing themselves say same thing. Right? They come to 8 coaching sessions or 8 therapy sessions, and they come to that ninth one and they say, "I'm just going to talk about the same thing." But that's the moment when therapy starts in so many ways. When the client comes to the coaching session or the therapy session and says, I can't stand hearing myself talk and complain." I haven't told this story in a while, but I have told it many times. When I was sitting at a professional conference a couple of years ago before the pandemic with my therapist, we were at the same conference on attachment theory. So I was able to have a cup of coffee and take a break with her. And I said during this break that we were on together, well, actually, she started the conversation. She said, "What was it that made the big difference?" She was just looking for feedback, I think, wanted to know my process. And I told her a couple of stories, a couple of moments in therapy that were crystallizing moments for me. And then I turned it on her and I said, "What about you? What made the difference?" And she said, I'm a little bit slower of a learner than you are." She always is so humble. She said, "I'm a slow learner, and so it took me a long time." She said something about 8 years into my second analysis. She said, toward the end of a session, I said to my therapist, she said, "I don't know how you can stand me. I don't know how you can tolerate me coming in here and blathering on about the same complaints and the same issues." And the therapist responded to her saying, "That's really important. We should talk about that going forward." And we both laughed. And I said, as tears were starting to come to fill up my eyes, I said to my therapist, "It's hard to imagine, isn't it? It's hard to imagine that somebody could tolerate you, that somebody could tolerate me, all of me." So we look for somebody who's patient. And for me, to be patient like that, you have to have some experience with it. After sitting with a therapist for 15 or 20 years and experiencing what it's like to sit across from a capable, empathic therapist, because she could sit with me and my horrible, rotten self, I could sit with me. That's how it works. That's how attachment works. That's how human development works. Because she could sit with me patiently, I could sit with me more patiently. And now I can sit with other people for years and for decades and understand that people are on their own journey. And because I've watched myself and seen how hard it is to change ideas and to change patterns and to change feelings, to grow, to expand. I've seen how difficult and excruciating and terrifying all of that is. I have so much more compassion for other people that are going through the same process. A humble therapist is important. Look for somebody who's humble, who can apologize, like I said. And remember, humility is a sign of confidence. Always, always, always. A humble person is confident. An arrogant person is insecure, right? Somebody who's defensive is insecure. They're threatened. Somebody that's willing to meet you where you're at. I've heard this for decades. I've heard therapists say, "Trust the process." I've even seen clients, I've seen programs, therapeutic programs, have that idea, "Trust the process," as a slogan that they employ. But what that means is that you have to bring your distrust, right? If you're going to trust the process, that means you have to bring your distrust. You have to bring your skepticism, your cynicism, because what you're saying is, my history tells me that this isn't going to go well. Not really. Meeting you where you're at means that that the coaches will take you where you're at. So our slogan is come as you are. And if you struggle to participate in any way or struggle to trust the process, you must have a good reason. You must have a good reason. Look for a therapist who's a coach who's still learning, who's reading, who's studying, who's excited. For me, all of this is about having a passion for your own work. I think that therapy is a sacred opportunity. And I think the therapeutic or the coaching session is a sacred space. I think it's a magical place, and it's an honor to be able to sit with you. It's an honor to be able to sit with you in this process. Do they self-disclose? People have different styles. There's no one right or wrong reason, right or wrong way to do it. I do a lot of self-disclosure. My therapist does less. She does it more vaguely. Are they able to recognize your preferences, your ideas, your agendas? Your requests are not marginalized as simply your issues. Look for background. What's their background? How are they degreed? I don't place a lot of emphasis on degrees and letters behind the name. I place a lot of emphasis on how somebody shows up, how I feel around them, how much of a student they still are. So I don't place a lot of emphasis. Like I said, it's your right to ask questions and deserve intelligent, confident answers. Are they getting supervision? One of the things that happens at Evoke is that we all have trainings in supervision. They can call. In fact, somebody reached out to me on our coaching team today asking for supervision about something that they were working on. Jamie Gill, my therapist, in the Audacity Review said, "What does a well-trained therapist, or in this case, coach, look like? A well-trained therapist is an expert at listening. He or she wants to hear how you feel, not how you are supposed to feel. He or she will try to find you where you are. He or she will try to find out how it feels to be with you, how it feels to be you, with your history, your dilemmas, your hopes and fears. If instead of trying to hear and find you, your therapist has the right answer for you, find another therapist. The right answer will be the therapist's answer and not your answer. This will likely duplicate the ways that you were wounded by your parents." One could call the practice of applying terms, techniques, and theory without the recognition of the therapeutic process doing psychotherapy. I wrote a paper on this. It may be evident in statements like you're in denial or you're rationalizing. In their frustration and with an overwhelming sense of impotence at their ability to make behavioral change, therapists may claim his mother has a borderline personality disorder and her unwillingness to receive feedback is evidence of her resistance, right? Using all this clinical jargon. These labels, this jargon, these assumptions often bespeak the clinical staff's frustration and may ultimately serve to ensure that the therapist or the coach does not encounter their own self, which will lie deep beneath the conscious level. While labels can be a good shorthand for therapists and for coaches for a clinical team to discuss the patterns of defenses in clients, they are often used to excuse the therapist from the equation, right? To talk about somebody's addiction, to talk about somebody's narcissism, to talk about somebody's borderline functioning, whatever it is, depression, anxiety, oftentimes is a way for therapists or coaches to wash their hands of their responsibility and participation in the therapeutic process. Look for somebody that can be authentic, that can maintain their rational response in the midst of stress. They can be honest and authentic. They're not fear-based. A lot of therapists, coaches will put a great deal of fear onto the client or the patient. I love this quote from Jamie Gill. She says, "Both cruel people and inadequate therapists are famous for a desire to destroy the defense without considering the consequences." Right? People that want to fix the symptoms. So look for somebody that can find you. Look for somebody that can hear you. Look for something that can work with your agenda. You get to decide. And I want to empower you to be a critical consumer. Ask tough questions and expect and require intelligent answers. It's not your job to train them. That's something they're supposed to have taken care of. Look for somebody who's anxious to find you rather than fix you. And if you're working in a parenting context or a couples context, do you feel like the coach or the therapist is trying to change you, to use you to change somebody else? If that's happening, it makes you feel like an object, that you're not being seen. Yes, mom or dad. Yes, parent. Yes, you have issues that you bring to the table that affect your children. But those issues that you have aren't just something that's in my way. They're evidence of your own unhealed wounds and trauma. And they deserve the same kind of compassion and respect that I give to your child. Does it feel like you're an object? Or do you feel like you're being seen? How you feel matters and ought to be treated not merely as quote unquote your issue. If you get upset with them, they don't make it about you. It's okay to disagree with your therapist, and good adult, mature, experienced therapists will welcome and celebrate your disagreeing with them. Sharing with them how you feel, not just about other people and your life, but about them, is the way to find that out. They're able to laugh at themselves. An adequate, effective, mature therapist can laugh at themselves and realize how ridiculous they are. And they don't need to be a good therapist. And they don't need you to think that they're a good therapist. So there are so many parallels between the coaching and the therapeutic approach. Coaches can do it virtually across state lines. They can't bill insurance companies. Coaches don't work with psychiatric cases or acute cases where safety is an issue, for sure. But aside from that, they can grapple with so many of the same kinds of issues and processes. So if you're looking for something, if you're looking for somebody that you can connect to, doesn't have to be in your hometown or in your state, the Evoke coaching process is our offering. It's our idea. All right, folks. Thanks for listening to that. I hope that was beneficial. Like I share at the end of every broadcast, my two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do that deep dive, that springboard or that accelerator in your own life, Finding You is our offering. Finding You is our 5-day intensive process. October 16th is the next offering, September 20th after that. Those are filling up. I think August is full and September is filling up. We also have an online offering that is about half the time and a third of the price. So if time and resources are at a premium for you, the online option is fantastic. I'll be running the Returning to You in October 25th. If you've been to Finding You, this is part 2 if you want to come back. And then I'm going to be in the UK this fall. We also have custom programs for families, for co-parents, and for couples. So reach out to intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more about that. We have support groups for current and alumni families. August 3rd at 7 p.m. Mountain Time is that next offering. And once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. August 22nd at 6:30 p.m. is that next offering, people that are a little farther along. We also have an intensive support group that happens once a month. August 8th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that next offering. If you want to know more information, go to evoketherapy.com/family involvement for more information. We have family treks that families can engage in during their child wilderness program. Aside from it, this is outdoor, experiential, wilderness-based family programs. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com if you want to add that to your program, if you want it to be a transitional part of your program, between programs, after programs, anywhere where you think that might fit. We ask all current parents to try 6 12-step support groups, any combination. We just ask you to try it out. And if you don't think it applies to you, now you know how your child or your spouse feels. If the people there seem different to you, those are the exact same excuses that children and spouses have. Those include Al-Anon, alanon.org, CODA.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. I love adultchildren.org. Refugerecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired support group program that has less of an emphasis on a higher power, practices and focuses on mindfulness and radical acceptance. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness is a wonderful national program, federally funded, that has free classes and resources in your local communities. Go to NAMI.org for more information. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You on your favorite podcast app, wherever you consume podcasts. Finding You an Evoke Therapy podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer. Search for Finding You there, and you can find us there. You can also go to YouTube's Evoke, our YouTube channel, Evoke's YouTube channel, and you can watch the rebroadcast of any of these. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram by using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can search us you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, the Evoke Therapy blog has wonderful content. If you want to give back for people that can't afford treatment, if that's in your heart, the 3 charitable partners that we work closely with are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast will be August 1st. Remember, I'm switching times here on out. August 1st, that's next Tuesday, at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern Time, and of course, 7 Central. And I'll be taking live questions. You can always email questions in between in advance to webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can also share the link for the Q&As with your close family and friends. If you want to bring people that are close to you into this work and give them some exposure, they can come with their questions. You can bring their questions and ask them to me. All right, folks, I hope this was a helpful point of contact and helping you know about our coaching offering, our coaching services. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up and thank you for being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Take care. Bye-bye.